I was particularly interested in the downtown area of Toronto. And the three things that interested me most at that time was technology, architecture, and public space. So within that, my interest had to do with how artists were using technology in more intimate ways, in ways through interaction where they could form a more intimate space in the public sphere. So I was really interested in how that personal space could be negotiated in the public arena, especially at a time where millions of people were in the downtown area. So what they would experience would be in close proximity were interactive art installations by artists who were using technology, and in which they would become a very important part of the work itself. And whether it may have been viewing it as an observer, as they traveled through Zone B, that the close proximity of the works together would also provide these kind of linkages to them understanding that there was an intimacy evident in many technologically based works that actually countered the whole past perception that technology was something alien and cold and distant. With that thematic in mind and that perception, this thought was put out to all of the artists, and so the interpretations of that intimacy would vary. But one thing that was certain was that the artists did share this this sensibility about technology in their work. So some of the binding elements were, for example, some of the artists used illusion, used the architectural framework to express that. Somebody like Rose Bond, for example, that who showed her animation film in the windows of a building in which people could, view this kind of personal space of hers from the street. And then to move into something like Bill Byrne's audio work, where you happen to come across it at the atrium on the bay, and this sound, of the Dogs and Boats and Airplane Choir, sort of sparked them to stop and think, what is that? So that they'd stop and get more intimately involved in it. Or many of the robots, for example, of Ken Ronaldo, a way of actually interacting with technology, through this closeness to technology in the form of robots, and with many of the others. So there was sound, there was illusion, there was an animation of space, and certainly the use of architecture in major ways that provided these binding elements. What is different about a project in the public space is that it's there's the unknown factors, and so when you're working with public space, there's a space that you would like, for the artist to work in, or the artist wants to work in. Sometimes that space may not be available, so there is often a reconfiguring of the work or rethinking of the work, for example, and so often, for the better in that sense. So the process of positioning the works is an evolving process, and the work evolves, with that space, hence the site-specific nature of it. The work of Bill Byrne's, the Dog and Boats and Planes Choir, that deals with technology's, effect. We think about the sounds. Originally, it was thought of as a performance that would be produced by the artist and with a choir master, and that the children would be on site during the night, and that's not going to be possible because parents aren't going to allow their children to be up all night for for all the hours of Nuit Blanche. And so it was at that point that we talked about it as a soundscape, that the effect would be the same, but it would also have a more resonance, in a space without it being a static performance. You actually experience it, resonating around you in this space. So that actually worked in a sense of where it evolved into something else. Works such as the McLuhan's massage parlor, finding the right spot for that, and we certainly ended up being in the Metropolitan Hotel and on the second floor. It worked out considerably better because the intimacy of the space of that ballroom was far more conducive than something that would be highly public. So these elements all played into the final, the final work itself. So, in a nutshell, you're adjusting, the work according to the public space, and also you're adjusting the work to create the best kind of interactive environment for it that may not have been what was originally determined. It started actually with a request on the part of the City of Toronto to submit a proposal. And so in that sense, you think big. You don't think of budgets, you just think of a thematic proposal. And you're also thinking about what would you like to do. You don't identify a zone or anything. It's basically it's like thinking about a public art project out there. And so and to submit 5 to 7 artists within that without any specific work. And so I selected 5 artists in particular that I wanted to pursue in the context of this thematic of the future of the present, and that there were 2 other artists also that I suggested if they would participate. And at that point, we don't touch base with the artists at all in the proposal stage. So when I was accepted, then we go through the process of inviting the artists and introducing the theme, and they determine whether they want to participate or not. And then there's another process, which was an open call and more money, where there were artists that were added because of more money, and to think about adding 4 or 5 more. And then the open call, where artists actually submitted their works to the zone that had a particular theme. So at the time, I didn't know it was Zone B. When I was thinking of the proposal in my mind, Zone B was the most appropriate for it, and it fit very well. Luc Courchain's McLuhan's Massage Parlor, and that work was basically a spin off the book, the famous book, The Medium is the Message, and there was a print error at the time that book was put out in the 60s that had Messages Massage, so he uses that. But it was on the second floor of the Metropolitan Hotel in one of the ballrooms, and it was a 4-screen video projection, but an interactive installation in which the public, through a device, could actually enter the book. So the book actually comes alive through voice, similar to McLuhan, to all of the quotes and messages that were within the book. So it was like bringing this into life in the 21st century. And it was also such a premise, for the show itself. Isabelle Eur's installation, her video installation in the Metropolitan Church called Ascension. And in this was a combination of a beautiful video with a sound component, an audio component, that showed the nave of the church continuing to extend as you sat, within the pews. And her intent was that at a busy time such as Nuit Blanche, how do you slow it down, and will people actually sit to watch it? And again, it was a perfect installation in that people did. Most people sat there for 20 minutes, and even as it reached a crescendo, and you would think it would be end, you just were brought back to the beginning and continuing through this extension of the church space. And so it was very Zen-like to watch. And the other would be the more interactive was Ken Ronaldo's pieces that were connected in Dundas Square and also in the Eaton Center. And that was the paparazzi bots that were these kind of celebrity paparazzi bots that people could interact with and have their photos taken, and then their photos would be then projected, on a TV screen, so they would reach this celebrity status. And also Face Music was a more complex interaction where these robotic hair-like creatures were on the Dundas stage, and they responded to body heat. So when people came up close to them, then the camera came close to them, and their images were then pixelized and translated into music, which was then projected on the screen behind. And so it was an experience that was good for any of the viewers, the voyeurs, as well as the people that were interacting. I was only in touch with the artist and certainly with the crew at the City of Toronto as the work progressed. And so we would be able to see it through technology itself. We're able to see it through our our Dropboxes and our videos and our emails and social media and so forth. So as it progressed, that's what happened. You never know once it is in place. But some of the challenges were that this was a very big church. The ceiling height was very large. We would not be able to find the kind of canvas or screen that would fit the entire. So Isabel's challenge was, how do you, with the screen size that we could, bring in, how do you still create that illusion of architectural space? And it was very successful in doing so. So we kind of worked along with her in adjusting so that it could be done. I think Marshall McLuhan, of course, was like years, light years ahead, at that time, and he talked about artists in particular were going to be those visionaries that were going to be able to close the communication gap, and technology was this medium in which to do so. And years later, you see this happening in terms of new media work. So these pieces, these particular installations, and then the artists and the works that we eventually chose, and we decided on where they went, were a means in terms of creating these kind of encounters. People would come upon them, and of course they had the directions how to do so, but you come upon them and your encounters are open-ended. It's not like you're completely directed to do something. The playfulness of the works themselves, the interactivity, also is dictated by the public and the spectator and the participant that's coming into it. So that's what I mean by the open-endedness of it. I think art has been affected by technology in a big way from the time that the video camera came out. So artists are in tune with using these new tools, and certainly artists, and I think the visual arts more than any other, sort of cross all of the disciplines. I mean, they cross science and they, physics and music and so forth. So they touch upon those elements. So I think that they've embraced technology in various ways, and sometimes they've even addressed technology's impact on society, in terms of that kind of distancing or the coldness in which they want to counter that and bring it back to more of a, that human element. So artists use it, and technology has impacted the kind of work that artists do. I often think of the reversal, though, is where is technology affected by the artists, and I think that's a whole other conversation. A whole other conversation, because I don't think that technology has been affected by the arts enough. I think that there's still a gap. It's a gap the other direction, and I think you see it happening in certain areas where, technology, animation in particular, let's say the gaming, community of technology is, hand in hand with artists currently and working together. You think about creativity and so forth. But when we think about software and we think about, all of these other elements, the technology is there, but artists are also using it in interesting ways. And I think that more of the technology sector could be actually bringing in artists to work with them in design or, elements that deal with thinking out of the box in technology. If I had to give advice to any of the young artists out there, is to be brave and not be safe with that. That's not the kind of work that is going to make a difference, in the future, and it's not the kind that's going to get that attention. Also in being true to your beliefs and what you want to do. So you'll know in using the right tools that you're using and how to get that message across. But I really stress the fact is playing it safe doesn't really get that far, and you need to have that courage and that taking that risk to get your work out there.